atmosphere and the surface of the earth, there is a constant heartbeat. And it is around 7.83 hertz. And what these tuning forks are harmonics of that. So I have 54.81, which is 7.83 times 7, and I have 62.64, which is 7.83 times 8. So the difference between the two, anybody? Binaural beats, come on. I thought that you guys would know. So the binaural beat principle is that if you introduce one frequency into one ear and one in the other, your brain will actually create the brainwaves of the difference between the two. So the difference between these two is 7.83. And that is your brain in a kind of beta alpha cusp of quiet mind. You know, most people are in beta and they think too much. It's really one of the biggest problems with humans, is we think way too much. Yeah. And so when you listen to these forks, it brings you down into that state of mind where you're not thinking, where you're listening, where you're present, where you're aware. It also helps to remind the body of this very important frequency that, when astronauts started going outside the atmosphere, they were developing space sickness. And what they found was that they were not being exposed to the Schumann resonance, which acts as a kind of constant metronome that all our circadian rhythms get based off of. And so they started putting these Schumann resonance generators in spacecraft, and people stopped getting space sickness. So it's a very, very important frequency for human health and organization. And so that is why I chose them to be the primary forks that we use in this practice. So with tuning forks, you can use them on the body. So what I'm doing is I'm just coming in, I'm using a fair amount of pressure. I'm pressing and squeezing. So for those of you who are using weighted tuning forks, in my observation, it requires 3 times the amount of pressure that you think it does in order for them to be comfortable and effective. So most people would come up and do something like that. How does that feel? Yes, not good. And all I'm doing is kind of placing them. It's sort of like, that's not what you do. You press and squeeze. And how does that feel?
I can feel that.
Yeah, good. Okay, so if you're using weighted tuning forks, I can pretty much guarantee you you're not using enough pressure in them. So that's just something that you want to think about. Now, how this works is the sound enters into the body, into the water, into the flesh, and it opens up space between molecules. So people who have trigger points and you come in and squeeze them, it interrupts the pattern of holding and it creates more space. If you're familiar with lithotripsy, which is the process of using sound to break up kidney stones. So you have a kidney stone that's too big to pass, you get subjected to this very strong pulse of sound, the wavefront hits the kidney stone, it opens up space between the molecules, it breaks it apart, and then we're able to pass the smaller stones. This is the same principle that we're using. We're finding areas of dense energy in the field and using the sound to break it up so that the body can circulate it instead of hold on to it. So I start off just by doing a little bit of weighted fork work on the body, and then I'm going to come out into and find the edge of the field, and I'm going to start working in. Now, before I do this, we all need to breathe together. And what I've learned from this work is that every place where there's a tangle, there is no breath. And so when we get into this, the tuning fork is going to broadcast the information that tells your body to stop breathing. We don't want a whole room of people not breathing, okay? So a big part of our work has to do with learning to breathe deeply and openly, but also ground at the same time. We're electromagnetic organisms. And any kind of charge that we have is something that can very often go to ground. So I want us to all take a moment to breathe into the belly in the area that is behind and below the navel, and you as well. So breathing into the area that's behind and below the navel, just fill up with air, just getting that belly breath going on. Now there's a second part of this that's really important, and that's the connection to ground. So I want you to imagine that there is an eternal waterfall of energy that's going from your belly, down out your tailbone, down out your legs and feet, and connecting right down into the center of the earth. So that on your next breath, when you breathe into the belly, you relax the muscles around the tailbone, and you exhale your energy down into the earth. do that breath, we actually make some sound on the exhale. And what that does is it discharges your vagus nerve. So as we get into these distortions, into these areas of difficult memory or uncomfortable thought or feeling, it's going to make your vagus nerve go, and your diaphragm go, and what you have to do is notice that and expand the breath into the belly, discharge it down into the ground, and let the vagus nerve relax. Okay? And so I want you to pay attention to your breathing as we go and just see what you notice. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to find this hypothetical double layer membrane at the outer edge of the biofield, and I'm just going to feel into that and see what I notice. Now, the acoustics aren't so bad in here. Some of you might hear the changes, some of you might not. What we find is that some people just hear the nuances right away, and other people, it's not until they get to their second level of training, even after they've gone through a lot of practice, that they start to actually hear the changes. Some people it just sinks right in, and other people they don't. So don't worry if you don't hear it. Right? But I want you to pay attention to your breath. I want you to pay attention to just what you're noticing in your own bodies. And if anybody has right shoulder issues, are you okay with being a bit of a surrogate for them?
Indeed.
Okay, so you can project your own hologram as a superimposition and also receive the session. Okay, so what are you noticing so far, just since I started? If anything.
I'm enjoying the deep breath.
Yeah. Well, this is such a big and important part of health, is breathing. And many people hold their breath. And many people don't discharge, don't ground. And, you know, they get all this stress and these thoughts and these feelings and everything's bouncing around up here. And then they got inflammation and pain and blah. It's all just, let it go. You want to just be able to breathe that down. So I've hit a spot right here that's grabbing me. It feels a little sad and just sort of funky. So I'm just going to stay there in that. I'm going to reflect that back to her body. Now, in some cases, what we do is we work with the timeline. We'd say, okay, this is, you know, birth, and this is now, and how old are you? And we can kind of go through and figure out exactly what the story is with each area of dissonance. Lately, I've been kind of uninterested in that. And I'm more interested in just having people notice what they're feeling as I'm working. When I'm in this spot right here that's making me not breathe, what are you noticing? Tell me your name again.
Rhiannon.
Rhiannon. Okay, Rhiannon, right there.
I'm feeling vulnerable.
Yeah. And I'm feeling like I can't breathe. So I'm just noticing, you know, and it feels, there's a little bit of a shaky feeling in there. So when we are going through people's fields and we're poking around in these different memories, I make people cry all the time. I mean, even strangers on buses, like, I make them cry, even without a tuning fork. Because this is my energy of, you know, being in all of these places with people. You know, they can like saw off the top of your skull and poke something in your brain. You know, whatever it is in your brain that controls your arm, they poke it and your arm does that, right? So that's what we're doing. We're poking around in the field and we're stimulating the emotions of these particular memories. So people can have very dramatic responses. You know, they can burst into tears on the table as some memory that they hadn't thought of in years is suddenly being activated. But what's cool is that we're not just triggering it, we're actually helping it to discharge. Right? A lot of stuff and blow is a consequence of all this built up charge every time you've ever felt that way. And so, you know, when something triggers you, all of a sudden all these resonant nodes of that feeling are firing off. You know, you've pressed my buttons, you've yanked my chain, you know, it's your fault. But especially partners and spouses, they're so easy to blame. You! I'm fine! But, you know, there are buttons, and they usually come from childhood wounds, stories, you know, that are still have charge, still have form, still have substance, and keep on getting between us and the rest of our life, because they're in our field. And we just keep encountering that same lens, that same filter, that same story, and it's going to appear like it's coming from out there, but in reality, it's just your own noise. Everybody take a breath.